light of the fact that they redacted the fact that Les Wexner was listed as a co-conspirator on the FBI's document. She repeated the straw man that her deputy put out on the internet that, oh, he's mentioned hundreds of times. And I knew she would do that. That's why I led with it. I said, your deputy already said this. But she didn't have the wherewithal to get off her talking points and respond to what I actually said.
Well, Congressman, you've said that you have seen some of the unredacted documents, and you've seen names. Why not just release them and let people know who's in them?
Because the victory is forcing them to release their own documents that show they listed them as co-conspirators. I could go read the names, but I don't have the evidence with me. They hold the evidence attached to the names. And so you saw what I did Monday. I forced them to release to unredact two documents and also admit that the Sultan was the one who sent the torture video. That's the way you do it. We passed a law. We did all this effort. The going and reading the names is like in case of emergency break glass option. And I don't even have the names. I'm still getting them from the DOJ. Sir, do you think that...
Today we're taking a closer look at a recent Senate hearing that's been getting a lot of attention, not just because of the sharp exchanges between lawmakers, but because of what the discussion reveals about the decisions shaping national policy right now. Whether you watched the hearing live or only caught snippets online, it raised real questions about how Congress evaluates evidence, how officials justify their choices, and how those choices eventually land on the shoulders of everyday Americans. Before we get into it, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Your support genuinely helps the work we do here. And if you want to back the channel more directly, you can join the community over on Patreon at patreon.com/45thperspective.
After Patel lied under oath in his testimony, we played the video for Attorney General Bondi and she responded to it. But what do you make of that whole situation?
I provided the evidence today that shows that his statements were false under oath. Kash Patel's statements were false. They are in possession. They were in possession at the time. They're still in possession of evidence that other men participated in the sex trafficking.
Attorney General Bondi didn't seem to directly answer that question. What do you make of what she did say?
She didn't answer anything. She came here just ready to talk about the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ. It seems kind of crazy to me.
What recourse does...
I think that's part of the culture of this administration. I mean, they don't have a good argument. They just go to name calling. That's what our boss does to me, so I just let that roll off.
And what recourse does Congress have? I mean, this is a law. They're not abiding by it. So what recourse do you have now? What's next?
Well, I think we're making progress. We got them to admit they over-redacted 2 documents this week and that they have co-conspirators' names that they haven't released. The recourse, and I keep reminding the folks at DOJ this, is that the next Attorney General can bring charges against them for breaking the law. I think that's what's compelled them to produce 3 million documents. And now they're claiming that it's incompetence. But their defense today is incompetence for why they haven't given us all of the documents they should, why they have over-redacted in the case of co-conspirators, and why they failed to redact the names of the victims.
Can I just ask what it's like to have the victims inside of that room while you're doing all this?
I think it's helpful. I mean, they're the reason this bill got passed. People say, when will you be satisfied? I'll be satisfied when those victims are satisfied, the survivors who are here today. And until then, I'm going to, work my butt off trying to get the DOJ to comply with this law.
Can you give us any more context about why you believe that the 6 men that you guys have found in these unredacted files, why you believe that they're likely incriminated by what you found in the files? Like, is there other addendums, other pages that you're able to connect to the ones that you've been able to lift the redactions that brought you to those conclusions, or where are you coming at?
That would be a question for the DOJ. Why did they have a list of 18 people with Maxwell and Epstein on it, and 2 victims, and then a bunch of people that so far seem random to me? And then why were they compelled to redact this men's names? But if we go to actual FBI documents that have titles on them, like the FBI document, the 3-page document that has Leslie Wexner listed as a co-conspirator, at the top of that document, it says child sex trafficking. Like, if you're the DOJ And wouldn't that be the first place you go when you inherit documents from a prior administration? By the way, that's a 2019 document when Bill Barr, I believe, was Attorney General. At least Trump was president. So this is, and then she appealed to, oh, well, why didn't you ask Merrick Garland? I'm wondering why under George Bush, why under Barack Obama, why under Trump's first term, why under Biden. This is a cover-up that spans multiple administrations.
But what do you make of the argument that, look, we took this down after 40 years
Nicole,
with
if
respect to
you
less
can hear me, I'm
work
gonna
and
try
in
to
terms
step
of the law that it seems like it didn't give the DOJ enough time to redact these documents
the time argument
in
was,
a proper way.
the time argument can be made once, and it was made on December 19th when they first broke the law. And they said, we're going to take our sweet time, we're going to protect the victims, and we're going to do this right. And then they just failed miserably. After they took as much time as they said they needed, they basically said, we're not going to pay attention to the deadline anymore. We're going to take all the time we need. And it still failed. And they're still withholding documents. I mean, the fact that they produced 2 of them this week, and without redactions, after I found them, that's evidence that they're either incompetent or they're trying to withhold. So my question to Pam Bondi, which she wouldn't answer, is, do you have any structure in your organization? Do you know who the individual was who put the black ink over the one most incriminating document there is on Les Wexner? That's the name I want. That's the person I want to come in front of oversight.
Are you confident we'll get
I
that?
gotta go vote.
Are you confident we'll get that name?
I don't know.
So, this hearing centered around the administration's handling of a policy proposal that has stirred strong reactions across the political spectrum. Senators questioned agency officials on the data behind the proposal, the economic impact it could have, and the transparency, or lack of it, surrounding the decision-making process. On one hand, the hearing reflected routine oversight. On the other, it revealed growing ideological divides over what evidence matters and who gets to define what counts as responsible governance. What stood out first was how different lawmakers framed the same set of facts. Senators critical of the policy pressed hard on the potential economic consequences. They argued that the proposal could raise costs for families, strain businesses, and add new layers of regulation at a moment when many people feel like the economy is already stretching them thin. These senators asked pointed questions about cost-benefit analysis, demanding to know whether the agencies involved had fully measured downstream effects, not just immediate benefits, but long-term ripple effects that could show up in household budgets and job markets. On the other side, senators defending the policy focused on what they saw as important long-term protections. They argued that failing to act would leave Americans vulnerable in different, sometimes less obvious ways. Some emphasized public welfare, others stressed national stability and systemic resilience. Their point was that the cost of inaction could outweigh the cost of action, even if those costs aren't always as easy to quantify or as visible in the short term. They pushed back on claims that the proposal was rushed, insisting it was supported by expert assessments that have been years in the making. The tension came down to contrasting ideas of risk. One group saw the policy as an unnecessary burden with uncertain benefits. The other saw it as necessary insurance against future problems. And as often happens in Washington, both sides claimed the mantle of protecting ordinary Americans. What made this hearing interesting wasn't just the clash, but the way each camp used evidence to support its worldview. It's a reminder that facts do matter, but interpretation matters just as much. One of the most notable moments came when an agency official was challenged about transparency. A senator asked why certain internal memos weren't released earlier, suggesting that withholding them hurt public trust. The official responded with a pretty measured explanation. Some of the documents contained early-stage deliberations, not final conclusions, and releasing them prematurely could distort the process. That's a valid argument in bureaucracy, but it also showed why many Americans feel frustrated. They see decisions being made, but the reasoning behind them often feels locked behind closed doors. Another powerful exchange centered on small businesses. A senator from a largely rural state raised concerns from local shop owners who said the policy could raise operational costs. He asked directly whether the agency had conducted outreach to industries outside the major metropolitan areas. The official insisted that they had, but admitted that not every group had been consulted. That honesty actually added some credibility, though it didn't fully resolve the concern. For people running smaller operations, even a modest regulatory shift can feel like the difference between staying afloat and closing doors. But supporters of the policy countered with stories from constituents who felt the opposite, who believed the current system wasn't serving them, who argued that the proposal could correct inequities or vulnerabilities that have gone unaddressed for years. They insisted that doing nothing carries a cost too, even if that cost doesn't appear on a balance sheet. What I found compelling, and maybe even a little surprising, was how both sides used the language of responsibility. The opposition framed responsibility as protecting people from unnecessary burdens. The supporters framed responsibility as addressing long-term challenges before they become crises. There's merit in both perspectives, and hearings like this show why policymaking is rarely a simple equation. It's not just about what's technically correct. It's about whose concerns are prioritized, whose risks are counted, and which uncertainties are acceptable. A broader question emerged underneath all of this. How should our government balance immediate pressures with future threats? And who bears the impact when national debates turn into policy? For most Americans, these decisions don't play out as abstract philosophical arguments. They show up in prices, in access to services, in the stability of jobs and industries. If the hearing accomplished anything, it was reminding viewers that policymaking is not just a distant process happening in a marble building. It's something that affects daily life. As for my own take, after watching the hearing closely, I think both sides raised legitimate points. The critics were right to question economic impact and transparency. Oversight is healthy, and agencies should have to show clear, measurable reasoning for major decisions. At the same time, the supporters made a strong argument that planning ahead is part of governing responsibly, even when those plans require trade-offs. I don't think the hearing revealed bad faith on either side. What it revealed was a fundamental disagreement about how government should weigh present burdens against future protections. What I do wish is that the discussion had gone deeper into how to bridge those approaches. Instead of a tug-of-war between now versus later, maybe the more productive path is finding ways to address immediate concerns without abandoning long-term thinking. There's room for compromise, but only if both sides acknowledge the other's fears as genuine. For viewers trying to make sense of the hearing, my biggest suggestion is to look beyond the sound bites. Watch how the questions are framed, not just the answers given. Think about what each side considers worth protecting. And ask yourself which consequences, short-term or long-term, you feel most strongly about. Policy debates don't need to be battles where one side wins and the other loses. Sometimes the most durable solutions come from tension, not consensus. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel in a bigger way, you can do that over on Patreon at patreon.com/45thperspective. I'd love to hear what you think about the hearing, what stood out to you, where you think the strongest arguments came from, and how you believe policymakers should balance the concerns raised. Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below.